Welcome back, listeners, to a brand new episode of the New Standard. And as always, we're trying to bring out the new standard for you regularly. You're checking out myself, Lance Williams. If you want to participate in the program and check us out, go to YouTube and do a search for the new standard and Lance Williams and or Neil Coulomb. However you get your podcast, do a search for Steelers, Lance Williams, the new pod, whatever, some iteration of that, and you should be able to find the show. Again, we're going to be bringing out more content as we get closer to the draft. Of course, we're going to be covering the draft, more likely, just what happens after the draft. I'll probably give you a show the day of the draft to try to, just give my thoughts on the Steelers' first round draft pick. And then we'll come back again the next day, day two, give my thoughts on that. Then we'll round it up the following week and just give you my thoughts on the draft and see if the Steelers address their needs. Now, the name of this particular show is That Cap? Is That Cap? So I'm going to go through a series of statements. I'm going to say the statement, follow that up with Is That Cap? And give my thoughts on both sides of the argument. But before I do that, I criticized Russell Wilson a couple of weeks ago for doing an Essence photo shoot. If you're not familiar with Essence, Essence is a popular magazine, pop culture magazine that's very popular in the African American community. He did a photo shoot where he did like some 80s, 90s R&B Jodeci type photos. I mean, one of the photos, he had a fur coat on. He was flexing with some overalls in another photo. But I talked to my dad about it, and he said, although those photos could be damning and harming for his reputation in the city, he didn't take a picture with no shirt on. So he stopped short of taking a picture with no shirt, with no shirt on. So he stopped short of ultimate no in the city of Pittsburgh. But let me give Russell Wilson and any Pittsburgh Steeler a hint or just a tip. In this social media age, where guys like me can do pods, everybody can have a perspective and a voice on X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever. That's very empowering, right? That gives people a lot of power. That also gives athletes a lot of power as well. And athletes can control their image like no other time before. With that being said, I would urge all Steelers to either post no social media or only post football related social media. Why? Even if you suck, right? Joe Yinzer can't say, well, he spent his time doing stuff that wasn't focused on football. He's not serious about his craft. I would cut off my left arm to play football. Well, for most of us that aren't genetically gifted by God, we would get our left leg knocked off, head knocked off, be in traction for weeks. So if you're a Steeler, if you come across this show by some weird reason, why don't you hire the Lance Williams PR firm? And the Lance Williams PR firm says this: post no social media or only post football related social media. Now, there is one exception. You can post media about yourself giving back to the community, but outside of those two things, don't do it. Football and giving back to the community, that's it. You'll come off as Saint Pigskin with the laces on top. and you'll come off as pure football all the time in a false narrative about players doing nothing but being in their playbook will be created for you. So let's get to the topic of the show again. You're listening to the New Standard. Is that cap? I'm going to say the first statement. The Steelers have the worst quarterback room in the AFC. Is that cap? Now, when you look at the quarterback room, I'm not so sure. I'm saying room because I'm trying to make that encompassing of the backup. And so when you look at the AFC North and you look at the rosters in the AFC North, as we pull up the Ravens roster, of course, the Ravens starter is defending MVP and Lamar Jackson. So in terms of starters, it's obviously clear, in my opinion, some people may disagree, that the best starter in the AFC North, arguably probably the second best starter in all of football, or definitely in the AFC, is Lamar Jackson. So in terms of, what team has the best quarterback room, a lot of that is going to tip and slant towards the room that has the MVP, and that's Lamar Jackson. Another quarterback they have on the roster, Josh Johnson, Malik Cunningham. You look at the backups, however, Josh Johnson has basically played for the entire NFL. He's played for the entire NFL. Malik Cunningham, don't know much about him. He's not much of a player. So when you look at the Ravens, what I think gives them advantage of having possibly the best quarterback room in a division is because they have the MVP in Lamar Jackson. And Lamar Jackson overcame one of his big hurdles last year. He won a playoff game, didn't play particularly well in the AFC Championship, but he is getting better. He's still very young. He's a two-time MVP. So I think most Steeler fans right now would rather have Lamar Jackson than Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. So I think they have a very good quarterback room in Baltimore, largely because of the MVP in Lamar Jackson. If you look at the Cincinnati Bengals and you look at their depth chart or their roster in their quarterback room, it's kind of interesting. I think everybody who watches football really has a lot of respect and a lot of praise for Joe Burrow. And they put Joe Burrow in high regard. And when you look at their quarterback room of Joe Burrow and Jake Browning, although the Steelers did play very well against Jake Browning, Browning performed admirably last year. I thought he was a very good, solid backup, and Joe Burrow is Joe Burrow. The biggest issue with Joe Burrow is Joe Burrow doesn't stay healthy. But if you look at their starter, and if the slant goes to the starter in the room, you got to favor the Bengals, Bungles, and the Ratbirds. They have very good quarterback rooms. And I would say that the quarterback room for the Bengals is better than the Ravens, because I think when you have Jake Browning as a backup, they can survive Joe Burrow being out much longer than the Ravens can survive Lamar Jackson being out. And the other team, of course, in division in terms of their quarterback room is the Cleveland Clowns. I'm just going to call them the Clowns. I am going to call the Browns and every team in the AFC North outside their names and be absolutely juvenile on this show. I'm a football fan. I'm from Pittsburgh. They are the Clowns and will always be the Clowns. Wait a minute, man. Think about it, right? The Cleveland Clowns celebrated having a white face mask. See, that's what you have to do when you're a garbage franchise. When you're a garbage franchise, you have to celebrate things like having a white face mask. I mean, hell, if you're sitting far enough from the field, you can't see the face mask. I mean, what are you going to do? Sell a face mask in the merch store? Yo, man, can I get a hat and a face mask? I mean, anyway, quarterback room. Actually, the interesting thing too is the AFC North might have the most or the highest number of black quarterbacks in the National Football League. Their quarterback room is Jameis Winston, Deshaun Watson, Dorian Thompson Robinson, and Tyler Huntley. Deshaun Watson is ass cheeks. He's not a very good player. He is not a very good player. He is not playing with rhythm and timing. He is not what he was. So I don't think it's capped to for me to say Deshaun Watson is the worst starter in the AFC North. However, I think Jameis Winston is probably the best backup in the AFC North. I think he's better than Cincinnati's backup, and I think he's better than Fields. I think arguably he's probably better than Watson, but given Watson's contract, and I think his cap hit is 65 million, he's going to be the starter. And that leaves us with Pittsburgh. And the question, is it cap to say the Steelers have the worst quarterback room in the AFC? Although I think Russell Wilson is a diminishing player, negative DVOA the last 2 years, he's better than Deshaun Watson. So I think automatically, if you have a better starter, you have a better quarterback room. And I think Justin Fields slots nicely with Browning, Winston as a quality backup, although I think Winston's better than the other two. So is it cap? Do the Steelers have the worst quarterback room in the AFC? The next thing I want to jump into, and you're listening to The New Standard, is that cap? Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. Do a search for The New Standard, Steelers, Lance Williams, Neil Coulon. Find us, like, subscribe, do your thing. Follow us on pod as well by doing a similar search, however you get your podcast. The second statement I wanted to jump into, intangibles are more important than tangibles. In draft season, you're going to hear a lot, or you've already heard a lot about tangibles and intangibles. So, something tangible, I know you guys are intelligent. I don't want to mansplain it to you. Something tangible is something that you can measure. Something tangible is height, hand size. Do you have small fingers, short phalanges, little hands like Joe Burrow? That's a tangible, measurable. You're 6'5", you run a 4.5, so on and so forth. So those are tangibles. Intangibles are football IQ, your ability to learn, your ability to grasp information. Another word for learn, or another phrase for learn. That's an intangible. Are you an asshole in the locker room? That's an intangible. Are you a leader? Do you have leadership qualities? Can you galvanize a room? Can you energize a room? Can you get people to follow? Those are intangibles. And so, particularly in this draft season, a lot is going to be made about intangibles and tangibles. So that's why we're asking the question, or the statement, or we're asking, is this statement cap? Intangibles are more important than tangibles. I'm going to argue that's not cap. Do you disagree? I think in the NFL, where it's a league of genetic freaks, there is a level of tangible or physical tools you have to play in the National Football League. Some guys might have an RAS of 9.99. Some guys might have an RAS of 7.5. We've seen numerous times where people who do not have the best physical measurables or the best tangibles become star players. Hell, I mean, look at Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald just retired. He was a short guy with short arms. I mean, he was a first round draft pick. People thought he was going to be good, but I don't think anyone projected him to be as dominant as he became. Arguably the best defensive player in his era. He did not have all the tangibles, but he had some hell of intangibles: strength, drive, stick-to-itiveness, relentlessness, stuff like that. Give you another example: quarterback position. Your tangibles could be, like Drake May, 6'4", 230, run a 4.4. Great athlete, checks all the physical boxes. However, maybe he's slow. Maybe you can only give him a certain amount of information at a time for him to grasp. Maybe you can't fill his plate up with everything and every concept. Maybe he gets overwhelmed by that and starts to get in his head and play slow. It's an intangible, the ability to learn. How do you measure that? You can't measure that. Maybe his football IQ is low. Maybe he doesn't understand these concepts and needs to rep it a lot more than another guy who might be 6'2", have a not as good of an arm, but is a great processor. You can throw him everything, absorbs everything, and can go out and do it and execute, and can be a high executor. So again, in the situation of intangibles, are they more important than tangibles? I'm going to say yes, because we're going to take for granted in most situations, you're going to have the physical tools and physical tangibles to even get into the conversation. And what's going to differentiate a player from another player are the intangibles. Let me jump into another question. This is going to be more Steeler focused. Again, you're checking out the show. Is that cap? Is it cap? Is this show good? Is that cap? Am I a fantastic podcaster? Is that cap? You can be honest. You can say I suck. I mean, I won't be offended. I mean, I'm not going to change my opinion of myself because of the opinion of you that I don't know, that I hope is consuming the show and giving me likes and subscribes. And you know what I'm talking about. So let me ask this question. Is that cap? Wide receiver is the Steelers' number one need. Now, we did a show a couple weeks ago. We talked about, we kind of rank needs. We put them in tiers, and we gave some definitions. I don't know those off the top of my head, but we gave some definitions on, needs and so on and so forth. We kind of defined a high priority need as, if you only have, it's a position group where you only have one starter that's an above replacement level. And I think when you look at the Steelers, wide receiver, in my opinion, it's not cap. Wide receiver, in my opinion, is glaringly the most needed position. They only have one good receiver on the roster, and that's George Pickens. Someone has to make up for the volume of Deontay Johnson. And on top of that volume and the targets that he get, they have to be a good player. They've got one above replacement level starter. Great physical tools, great upside and potential. But by no means, even that starter that they have in George Pickens, I mean, nobody would say he's a top 10 wide receiver. He has the potential. He has the physical tangibles. Does he have those intangibles? Hard work. He's going to work on his craft to take it to the next level. And that's also, again, why that question I ask about tangibles and intangibles, are intangibles more important? Is that cap? So when I'm looking at the Steelers roster, it's absolutely clear. Unless they want to run the ball 50 times a game, they don't have they only have one viable wide receiver. I mean, that's it. I mean, they're already a team that struggles to score at least 20 points. How are you going to score the requisite amount of points needed to compete for the division title and or championship if you don't improve that room? And if you look out in free agency, there's not a ton of guys out there. I mean, there's plumbers out there. I mean, if you want a plumber or a middle-aged guy like myself with not the physical tools, catching the football and getting 1 yard in a cloud of dust, yeah, sign me up. But I think wide receiver is absolutely their biggest need. Now, the question for you, and hope you respond in the comments, is that cap? Is that cap, that wide receiver, is their biggest need? Last but not least, and we touched on this a little bit in the last show. And before we get out of here, again, you're listening to The New Standard, Is That Cap? Make sure you like and subscribe to the program. What's more important? Or let me say it like this. A high floor is more important than a high ceiling for a player when you're evaluating them. What's more important? Or is that cap? Is this statement cap? A high floor is more important than a high ceiling. I'm going to say it might be more position dependent. But again, if I'm going to favor one or the other, and you have to make that judgment for yourself, I'm going to say a high floor is more important. Because I think reaching your ceiling, let's say your high ceiling, let's take Kirk Cousins and let's take Josh Allen. The odds of you reaching your ceiling, especially for a Josh Allen, came from a small program. I don't think he played too much behind center. All these different, from Wyoming, these different circumstances that made it, might make it hard for him to adjust, being in Buffalo, going to the National Football League. To reach your ceiling, there are so many things that have to go right outside of yourself and things that you can't control before you step foot in a building. How many players can we say have reached their ceiling or have maybe exceeded their ceiling? I think reaching your ceiling in a National Football League does not happen for most players. Because of that, I think a lot of players, I would rather err on a high floor where you may not have a high ceiling, but your floor is at a replacement level, slightly above replacement level player in the National Football League. If you get a lot of guys with high floors that you could squeeze out a little bit extra juice out of them, I think that's better than a high ceiling, in my opinion. But these are some of the questions I pose to you. Is that cap? High floor is more important than a high ceiling. Is that cap? The Steelers have the worst quarterback room in the AFC. Is that cap? Intangibles are more important than tangibles. Is that cap? Wide receiver is the Steelers' biggest need. And with that, we're going to conclude the program. And as always, tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe.